The broadcast of the adjourned meeting of the Minneapolis City Council will now begin.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Lisa Bender, and I'm the president of the Minneapolis City Council. I'm going to call to order this adjourned meeting for Friday, July 24th. Before we proceed, I'll note that this meeting has remote participation by council members and city staff as authorized under the provisions of Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Section 13D.021, due to the declared state of local public health emergency. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll to verify the presence of a quorum.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Present.
Councilmember Gordon.
Here.
Councilmember Cano. Councilmember Reich.
Here.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Here.
Councilmember Schrader.
Here.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Present.
Councilmember Ellison.
Present.
Councilmember Goodman. Councilmember Johnson.
Present.
Councilmember Cano. Councilmember Goodman. Vice President Jenkins.
Present.
President Bender.
Here.
There are 10 members present.
Let the record reflect that we do have a quorum. I've reached out to the council members who are not yet here, and I expect them to join us as well. The agenda for this meeting is before us. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would propose that we add the amendment of Resolution 2020R-122 extending the period of the hiring freeze policy in the item number 1 as the 7th resolution, as I had sent it to all of us and our colleagues yesterday.
Thank you. Councilmember Palmisano has moved that amendment to the agenda. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam President.
I missed you at first.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. I just had a question on the agenda, and really more for public clarity. But I know in our Transforming Community Safety Resolution, there's supposed to be a report back to council today with a set of preliminary recommendations for engaging the community, working with relevant experts and such. And I know that a lot of my residents were eagerly anticipating that. And so it would be great if we could get an update on where that's at, when we'll see it, and which department is working on that.
Great, thank you, Councilmember. Yeah, and thanks for asking that question. We can defer to the clerk as well, but I see Councilmember Cunningham in queue to speak to that item. I think honestly it was a technical error in the resolution itself that listed this meeting today, which is a special meeting to adopt the budget, and that item is really more appropriate to go through a committee, which in this council structure is really just the one committee, POGO. So Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for asking that question, Councilmember Johnson. I am helping to lead and facilitate that work, so I just wanted to speak to it briefly. So this will be coming before POGO this upcoming Thursday, and due to the fact that there was a technical error, given that today's just for the budget, so it will be going through POGO this upcoming Thursday, and to be able to just give you a quick overview of who's working on it, and there will be lots more detail on Thursday, but the lead folks on it are Sasha Cotton from the Office of Violence Prevention, Brian Smith from the Coordinator's Office, and Joy Marsh Stevens, also from the Coordinator's Office. So, and then almost nearly almost every department, it seems like, is a part of it. So we'll be getting a lot more detail about that. And thank you for creating the space for us to be able to address that at this point. So it will be this upcoming Thursday at POGO.
Thank you. I really appreciate the update. Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you both. And just to note, our schedules are very different than usual because of the shift from the pandemic as well as this additional budget process. So a week from today is a council meeting, the regularly scheduled city council meeting that will take up the items from the BIS and POGO meetings from this cycle. And then the next POGO meeting is on Thursday, August 6th. So that report will come on Thursday, August 6th from the staff that Councilmember Cunningham described. Okay, and yeah, thanks again. No problem. Thank you, Councilmember Johnson, for raising that, and apologies for that. Any confusion that has caused for constituents or the public. So we have Councilmember Palmisano's amendment. So I will move the adoption of the agenda with that amendment included. Is there any discussion on the agenda? Hearing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano. Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano. Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 11 ayes.
That carries, and the agenda is adopted as amended. Colleagues, the only item on our agenda today is the adoption of the proposed revision of our 2020 budget. Before we get started, I just want to thank you all for the work that went into this adjustment that was needed because of the pandemic and the economic crisis facing not just our city, but cities and communities across Minnesota and across the country. This is an unprecedented time, and while all of our budgets are shifting across community types and sizes, different levels of government, it's, I think, a little different and unique in each community as we face these challenges together. And in Minneapolis, we've seen a shift in the kinds of revenue that we will have available for city spending. We have seen a very sudden and quick drop in tourism, in commuting into our city, in folks coming in for entertainment purposes, sales tax revenues. And we don't know how long this shift will be in place, but certainly as long as folks are staying home. So as we approach these cuts, it's from a structural shift in how revenues come into the city that may last for years. So I really appreciate the time that we took, even in this urgency of cutting our budget, to understand how these short-term changes will affect our long-term ability to meet our community's goals and priorities. And so as we look into the 2021 budget, which we'll hear proposed from Mayor Fry very shortly in mid-August, you know, I've heard really strong commitment from each of our department heads to continue to take a race equity lens to all of the budget proposals they're making, and from each of you to really highlight those priorities, not just in this short-term budget cutting scenario, but in the long-term shifts facing our budget as a city. And that's really important because we have made big strides in a short time in terms of focusing resources from a race equity lens in everything from transportation to housing to community development and public safety. and in our own spending and hiring. But we have a long way to go, and we cannot let this crisis stop that progress. In fact, we need to continue to make those investments in those priorities now more than ever. So again, I just want to thank the staff who have really shown such leadership across every department in making tough decisions through that lens of our shared priorities to focus on racial and economic equity in everything we do. And for all of your leadership, especially Council Vice President Jenkins, who reminds us in every meeting that racism is a public health crisis, that race is intricately linked to the injustices that we see in our community and seen, almost more than anywhere else in the health impacts that we've seen from coronavirus. So thank you all for your leadership, and not just today, but going forward. So with that, I will move us to the first item, which is a resolution that amends the 2020 general appropriation. I'd like to recognize our Budget Committee Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, and thank you so much to Councilmember Palmisano for all of your work in bringing us this revised budget and your partnership in this, and to, of course, the budget staff and all of the department staff who worked so hard to prepare these documents today, who worked so hard to prepare for the shifts that we have made through the council process. It is so appreciated. Councilmember Palmisano.
Madam President, on behalf of the Budget Committee, I move adoption of a resolution approving amendments to the 2020 General Appropriation Resolution, Item 1.
Councilmember Palmisano has moved adoption of the resolution approving the 2020 revised General Appropriation Resolution. Is there any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Goodman, yes.
Thank you. I'm working on a phone and a computer. I'm sorry. I request that the vote on the amendment to eliminate the police department's public information unit be divided from the main resolution so that a separate recorded vote may be taken on that item. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman has moved to separate the item about the public information officer. I wonder if the communications or IT folks could shift the screen a bit so more of the amendment could be shown. I'm not sure if the whole of it can be shown, but I think all right, thank you. And we can zoom in our screens. I'm not sure how that's showing for the public at home, but that does give us the full picture of that sheet of the budget. So with that, I will take up that item first that Councilmember Goodman has moved to separate.
Madam President, may I speak to the motion, or do you want to take a vote on whether or not to separate, or if you determined it's okay to separate?
I was just pausing to ask the clerk if we needed to take a vote.
Madam President, it's a courtesy to go ahead and separate that one piece from the entire resolution. You certainly can vote if there's some objection, but as president, you can pull that apart.
Is there any objection to separating that item? Seeing none, we'll proceed with that item first. Is there any discussion on that item? Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam President. Can you hear me? Does this work? I know it sounds crazy.
Yes.
So I just wanted to shed a little bit of more light on this issue because I did have an opportunity to talk to my colleagues about it. And one of the things that was said during the conversation in the budget meeting was that we wanted to hear what journalists thought about this potential move. And now we know what journalists think of this potential move. And I just want to note in a letter from the Minnesota chapter of the Society for Professional Journalists, they note that they are expressing concerns about this proposal. They believe, and they say, Should the council approve this budget amendment, the PIO position would be eliminated and the city's communication team would take over police communications. We strongly discourage this change and request that council members table this vote on Friday until journalists and members of the public have an opportunity to weigh in. Their primary concern is that the city's communications department is not suited to this role. An effective PIO must have the trust of the police officers and journalists. That takes time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Will a communications liaison be on the scene of late night shootings? Will he or she give press conferences and return phone calls on weekdays and city holidays? There's also a concern that repositioning the police communication position will take away the autonomy that the PIO role allows. Public safety information, they say, should never be vulnerable to manipulation based on city politics and sentiment. They fully recognize and understand that the communications issues exist within the current PIO model, but do not believe eliminating that channel of communication will solve the problem. At a time when there is a renewed call for police transparency, any action to remove the PIO and undermine this position by putting it under the direction of the city communications office would further erode public trust. I will note that they also note that we tried this when I was on the council in 2013, when Mayor Ryback wanted to eliminate the PIO at that point. And the board felt then, as they do now, that in an effort to ensure transparency around taxpayer-funded public safety and law enforcement, that they not move the PIO position into the city's communication department. And I bring this up because Councilmember Fletcher himself said he wanted to hear what journalists thought. And we have heard pretty loud and clear what they think. I don't want to undermine my colleagues. I'd prefer to table this rather than have a vote, although I'm happy to vote on it. And I would defer to the chair or the council member who brought this forward if you would prefer to go forward by tabling it, or we can just take a vote and I'll vote no.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Councilmember Fletcher and then Schrader.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Councilmember Goodman, for raising this. I had the opportunity to speak to Emma Nelson yesterday, who is the president of the SPJ, and we had a very constructive conversation about the concerns and about what the issues are that journalists are raising. And I'm still convinced that this is a move that can move us forward rather than backward. I think it's very important. The truth is that I think people are worried about access, and we do need to make sure that we are assuring access and transparency in this move. And I think it's important for us through this conversation. I think this is a good opportunity for us to really reaffirm some key principles about how we report crime, which is that we report it honestly and accurately, which is that we report it free of political bias. And that means political bias from leadership in both City Hall and MPD. And that we structure those communications so that they're consistent and not subject to the political rhythms of City Hall. And I think it's very important that we take the opportunity of this transition to recognize that I think everybody's focused on the cut, and that's the easiest thing to focus on, but that we're also making an investment in communications, and that the opportunity to utilize that investment to make something that's frankly better than what we've had before, that's more trusted, that can create a little more accountability around the sort of pattern of inaccuracy that many of us have observed. I think there's a real opportunity to restore trust here, and I think that it's important. And I think that in general, I am 100% supportive of and committed to SPJ's mission of ensuring access for reporters. And I don't think that the city always does that as well as we can. And I think that's true of PIO. I think that's also sometimes true of city communications. I think we have work to do across the board to make sure that we're giving the public as much access as we can to the workings of the city government that they're funding. I do not think that the contents of my conversations with journalists over the last 36 hours since that letter was sent change my vote or my desire to proceed. And so I am hopeful that we'll still move forward with the vote and that we'll still move this forward today. But I do appreciate you raising the issues. I think it's important for us to really reaffirm our commitment that city communications is not subject to politicization by the council, by the mayor's office, by police leadership. I think it's very important that we really center, especially our communications about crime and about public safety in the facts, so that the public can really understand what's happening in our city.
Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher. Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilmember Goodman, for asking the question. I think two main things. One, besides journalists, I wanted to hear from the community, and we heard loud and clear that we need to make transformational change with how we do public safety, and this is just one step that we can be able to do in this budget right now. We've heard loud and clear that they do not trust the police. That needs to change. It's incredibly hard to have a public safety system that works for everybody if people don't feel comfortable calling for help. I think whenever we hear that in budget committee, whenever we hear that from our constituents, that should be a kick in the gut, that something needs to change. So I'm supportive of having the vote today. I thank Councilmember Fletcher for all his work on this. And second thing is, if the issue is worried about having someone to answer calls 24 hours, be able to get back to people, to be able to, frankly, be able to do that role, we'll do what we did in every single other job we hire for. We'll hire somebody that's qualified, someone with experience, and someone that can do the job. I think it's kind of with all due respect, kind of a silly argument. We will absolutely get the person that can do that job. So I think that this is the right move, and now is the right time to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to speak just briefly to this item. Just first, technically, this doesn't eliminate the position. It does move it, though, to a different department. And in some conversations that I have had since this has come up, I really wanted to try to drill down and what you have access to within MPD in terms of reporting is a PIO that you wouldn't in a regular communications department, like if to transition this permanently over to communications. In other cities, for example, different people in the police department sometimes have the ability to speak to things about like when and how a report came in and that type of thing. And I think that really does deserve looking at for transparency purposes. But some things that I feel strongly about are in MPD that wouldn't necessarily be accessible to somebody in a communications department are things like the dispatch system, other types of private data that may or may not be appropriate to share at the time to communicate things about a crime that's happened and at all hours of the day. I had a brief interaction with Suki Dardarian. She's the managing editor of the Star Tribune. And she wrote back and said I could share her thoughts with you all, and I would like to. She was talking about how we would like the city and police department to communicate with the media, because I think we all agree that we need a PIO that serves the community. She said, in general, we expect any government body to communicate with us authentically, respectfully, and factually. The folks who serve as spokespeople need to be credible and trusted, so they need a strong understanding of the subject matter, an appreciation for the need for transparency in government, and an ability to anticipate the kinds of questions we might ask. We need individuals who know and respect laws and procedures for public meetings and public disclosures, and that they actually see their job as serving the community. We know they also need to also be trusted by the people for whom they are speaking. And particularly in the case of law enforcement spokespeople, they need to be accessible at all hours. As you know, information and misinformation can travel quickly on social media. We need trustworthy people to help shed light on the facts important to public safety when news erupts at all hours of the day and night. Between the criminal justice and pandemic crises, transparency in government has never been more important. I share that to kind of illuminate that there's still a lot more discussion that we can have to improve the communications and how we do them around the city. I think that the audit last year about how we communicate as a city is a really good first step, but we need to work on implementing those steps. We absolutely need more resources and communications to do that kind of a work. But I think on this, I agree with Councilmember Goodman that I think I made the wrong vote on this the other day, and I will be changing my vote here for this one item today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham. Oh, sorry, Councilmember Goodman, then Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Councilmember Fletcher, for taking the time to talk to Ms. Nelson, who wrote us the letter. I very much appreciate it, and I do not question the integrity of your work at all. I do, however, question the comments where we are suggesting that this is a silly argument. Transparency in communication about what happens with the police is not a silly argument. And accessibility, as it pertains to getting direct information from licensed peace officers, is not a silly argument. The fact that journalists and open data and open meeting experts pretty much unanimously agree that this is a bad idea is not a silly argument. And I'll also note, this is hardly transformational change. If this is the transformational change that many of you are looking for, I would say there's a lot more work to do. Moving a position from the police department to the communications department is hardly transformational change. It almost feels like it's retaliatory towards the public information officer who gave out information at the time of the horrible murder of Mr. Floyd that he thought he knew to be correct. Information that I understand he got from the BCA. I don't want to make this about our current PIO. It seems like some people, probably not the author, want to make this about the current PIO, but this is not transformational change. And I would just let you sit on that for a minute when you start to tell the public and everyone who's upset.
Hi, this is Jeremy Schrader. I'm not able to take your phone call right now. Please leave your name or number and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
I'm done. I'm disgusted.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. So we have a couple of council members who have had to call into the meeting because of power outage or other technical difficulties. Councilmember Goodman, did you want to, were you finished? I know that was an interruption.
Madam Chair, I give you the greatest kudos for trying to handle this meeting with everybody calling in, myself included. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and thank you for doing a good job during this time at which it's hard for people to communicate and emotions are very high. I am done with my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. So we have Councilmember Cunningham, then Jenkins, then Fletcher. And I'll put myself in the queue as well.
Hello.
Here in the chat. Thank you. So we have Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you so much. So I have a technical question. Does this move have to happen alongside the budget, or is this something that can happen outside of this budget process? I don't know who would be the appropriate person to direct that question to, but I'm just curious if this has to be tied to the budget process.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. We can ask our finance department to weigh in. Typically, when we shift staff from one department to another or add or remove staff, it is done through the budget process. That's my sort of historical knowledge of that kind of action. But if anyone from finance wants to weigh in, I'd welcome that.
Council President Mike Intermill, the City Budget Director, I think that from a budgetary standpoint, the Fletcher amendment to eliminate positions in MPD communications and add positions in city communications is budget neutral, so that wouldn't change. It would change some of the numbers in the resolution before you, but it wouldn't change the bottom line. So from that standpoint, it would not necessarily need to be taken up today.
Thank you.
If I may, Madam President.
Sure. Councilmember Cunningham.
Yes, just very quickly, I wanted to get that information to be able to better inform whether or not we should delay this for further conversations. I will say that I've heard from some constituents that they do have serious concerns about this, and it's unclear about what the new, like how this would look in action. And so I will currently defer to my colleagues to be able to hear from folks, but I do think I wanted to make sure I have that information, but I do want to just share that I have heard from constituents that have some pretty serious concerns about this move without with a lack of clarity about what happens on the once this move is made. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just have to shift up. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam President. And I have a technical question as well, and then some additional comments. My question is, does the PIO need to have a law enforcement certification or background in order to access a crime scene? And so if someone can answer that question, I would appreciate it. And I guess my comments would be, as has been noted, there are some challenges that have been identified with our communications, and we haven't had the opportunity to take steps to shore those up. I've personally just been concerned with, the communication support that the council is able to access. And so it just feels like the capacity of the communications department and has been stretched to the absolute limit, given all of the challenges that we have been facing. And even prior to that, there, again, as has been noted, the audit department identified issues in areas where, we can certainly make improvements. So I would be in support of tabling this conversation to get more details. And if someone can answer the question about the crime scene, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Council Vice President. So it looks like we have a couple of comments. Chief Arredondo is on the line. We have a comment from the city coordinator as well about the budget process. So I'm happy to open it up to staff who would like to answer any of the questions I haven't asked.
Madam President, it's Casey, and I don't want to presume. I know that Chief Arredondo was on the line, and he may still be. He also, like others, is calling in and has had some technical difficulties. But to the Council Vice President's questions about crime scene, crime data access, things like that, he might be the best to respond.
Madam Chair, council members.
Welcome, Chief.
Yes, good morning. So to Council Vice President Jenkins' questions about certification. So you do not necessarily have to be a licensed peace officer to fulfill that role. However, there obviously are certain trainings that the PIO position undertakes, and obviously being embedded within the police department establishes a lot of that organizational knowledge, relationships, and just workings in terms of what a crime scene response looks like, what are some of the crisis management decisions have to be made, and those types of things. But specifically to being a licensed peace officer, that is not a requirement.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And then Mr. Ruff did, our city coordinator, note that we do typically make these changes in budget actions. We do occasionally move positions outside the budget process, which we have done recently when we moved one function of the city from a department to another department. Okay, so we have Councilmember Fletcher, then myself, then Councilmember Gordon. Councilmember Fletcher. Councilmember Fletcher.
Council President, why don't we let some other people comment? I'll jump back in at the end if it's still relevant.
Sure. Thank you. So I put myself in queue. I did want to comment on this briefly. I support moving forward with this change with the timeline provided in the amendment to allow some time for this transition. As Councilmember Pompano noted, the communications department went through an audit process, hiring an outside consultant to review the city's communication functions. It found that we have fewer communication staff than typical cities of our size. And certainly that there is a need to both invest in communications and, or at least gave a set of recommendations about how to more strategically invest in communications in our city. And so I think based on my takeaways from those recommendations, and I think our need to communicate about all of the things that the city is doing from an equal and coordinated fashion. I think this is an important change. And it is a change that is meeting resistance within the enterprise. So it's one of the reasons that I feel it's important for policymakers to make this decision. And I see the arguments on both sides. I understand the different positions that the council has, but I do not think more time will yield a different response from the enterprise itself. I think we can see that in the length of time that this conversation has been going on. So I would discourage us from tabling this for more discussion. I think it's just one of those things where we just have to make a decision. And then we have to do the work to make sure that we are meeting all of the goals set forth in this strategy, which is to make sure that all of our communications for every single department are transparent, that reporters are getting the information they need as quickly as they need it. There have been big shifts in reporting, in the speed and need for us to respond with information quickly as an enterprise. And our city's communication functions, the staffing levels are lower than they were before many of these changes took place. So I think it speaks to a need for us to really take seriously the communications functions of our city and invest in them. So I think some of the concerns we're hearing are part of an overall need for us to continue to implement those recommendations from the report. So that is why for those reasons, I support moving forward with this today and appreciate the work that's gone into it so far, and appreciate the timeline provided to implement this change so that we can make sure all of these details are covered. Councilmember Gordon.
Well, thank you very much. I'm also supportive of moving forward with this today, and I think even when the former mayor was proposing it, I didn't have very big issues with it. And in fact, when I was reading the concerns coming from journalists, I think those are actually the kind of concerns that can be addressed by this kind of modest change. Of course, within every department, we'll still have spokespeople who should be accessible to the media. And that was one of the issues I think we end up having when there's a designated person there who's filtering everything and is the spokesperson, but it isn't actually the leadership of the department. So we've seen fantastic work by other department heads when there's been a situation where they want to, the media wants to have access to what's going on, including from our amazing leadership in our current police department, to be accessible to the media, to be there to answer questions when they're needed. And I think we can have that coordinated through our communications department by strengthening it. And this is the right time, and I'm comfortable moving forward with this, because we've seen some issues in the past with having all these segmented entities in different departments make it harder to have a coordinated message and get the support that they really need.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to note, I did not move to table it. I was suggesting that to the author as a potential way to get more feedback and information. But as it stands now, this is just a simple up or down vote, which I am happy to take.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Council President Bender. I wanted to speak a little bit to Councilmember Goodman's comments as I've been reflecting on them and sort of thinking about the question about caution or not, the question about taking more time or not. And here's where I think we are as a city, because Councilmember Goodman's right. This is not transformational change. I actually don't think it's going to probably change that much what level of access people have. I don't think it's going to change that much what level of information we have, but it does allow us, hopefully, to create some consistency of standards, to take away some of the questions that a lot of people have had about the politicization of the way our department communicates. And so this is not transformational change. This is one of the really small changes. We are talking about doing transformational change, and I want to note what kind of barriers and what kind of caution people start to put up anytime you start to name a specific change, right? It's easy to talk about transformational change in the abstract. It's easy to talk about change generally in the abstract. But one of the things that we're doing as we move forward is we're going to start to actually name specific things that we're going to change, and we're going to take responsibility for those changes and accountability for those changes by doing them in public, by debating them in public. I think it's good that we're going to have a vote on this, and that we're going to know who voted yes and who voted no. And it's good that some of us are really expressing some real responsibility and accountability for making sure that this is a positive transformation, to the extent that it's a transformation at all. It is, as you note, a very small move, but even this small move is creating tension and anxiety. Stakeholders will come forward and express concerns about whatever was good for them about the status quo. They'll express fear about the change if the change isn't perfectly well defined. And I think as a city, we have been oriented towards doing change in a way that is extremely cautious. We weigh the costs of unintended consequences of changes extremely heavily in our calculations. We weigh the costs of unintended consequences of sitting still extremely lightly in our calculations. And it's very, very important at some point that we start to recognize our city is at risk of going under the costs of sitting still, under the unintended consequences of sitting still. Under the consequences of being sued over the practices of our police department, of being sued over the access to information from our police department. There is an opportunity for us to do systems change in a way that gets ahead of some of the problems that our city is currently sinking under the weight of. And at some point, we are going to have to be willing to step forward without the level of caution that many of us are accustomed to as policymakers, to say we're going to name a change, we're going to project a change, we're going to figure out how that change is going to work. We don't want to be reckless, but we certainly need to, I think, have a calculation of risk that incorporates the calculation of the risk of not acting, because people are asking us to do change. People are asking us to do this work. And I think it's very important that we move forward, and that this It is a small issue. Stakeholders are raising legitimate issues that we need to make sure we incorporate into the way we move forward. But I do think we need to move today.
Councilmember Fletcher, the clerk noted that I had moved to separate the items, but now move the item itself. Would you like to make that motion?
I would be delighted to make that motion, Council President. So moved.
Councilmember Fletcher has moved the item. I will second it for discussion, which we're already having. Thank you, Mr. Clerk, for that reminder. And I see Councilmember Johnson and then Ellison.
Thank you, Madam President. And I really do appreciate this debate that's happening over this. And I really respect the work that journalists do, that independent media does. And I'm sensitive to those concerns. And I think when you look at the intent of this, the intent is right now this communications function is under a department of more than 1,000 people, a department where leadership we want focused on addressing violent crime, on addressing crime in our city, and on improving those results. And I'm sensitive to the concerns of journalists. And I think we need to be very, very careful in ensuring that their concerns are not realized. At the same time, I also believe that we have an opportunity here to see more information being pushed out with greater accuracy if we have communication professionals that can be a part of the work plan, or some oversight rather, management oversight with communication professional experience that is focused on how do we actually get even more information out and do a better job communicating with the public. So to me, this is really about management. This is about direct supervision. And I think we can proceed cautiously with this while being sensitive to those concerns. I am open to, if there was an interest in tabling, I would be open to bringing this back up in another cycle or something like that. But I am also comfortable moving forward today with this, noting that I will absolutely, along with I'm sure my colleagues, be very interested in ensuring that this improves outcomes, improves results, that media has just as much access, and that the public has more information. I think there are opportunities to really push out more information. I can even give examples where, as a council member, we haven't had our shots fired reports we were getting since February 23rd. I think we have opportunities to improve communications out to block clubs and to better leverage those. I think we have more opportunity to proactively put information out on the city website about crime stats and response times and information that's happening. And so I think we have real opportunities there. And I think it is worth having somebody that has more ability in a management supervisor role to focus on that work plan and working with the trained professionals in this department or in this function today to try to realize that. And we have another budget revision coming up very soon. And so if this is not a productive move that improves outcomes, then we have an opportunity to correct that as well. But I do think, all things considered, even though we have these concerns, I'm sensitive to them, even though we have those, I do think this is worth trying to see if we can improve communications coming out from the city around this critical public safety function.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Council President. I just wanted to speak in support of this. I will be supporting it today. I think that while I would also be fine with us tabling this discussion for later, I think that if we're voting on it today, I will certainly be supporting it. I really respect my colleagues who are responding to the concerns that we heard from journalists. I know that that I saw that response and sort of read through the letter and a few comments from journalists on social media. But as I was reviewing the comments on social media, one of the one of the comments that was made by a journalist was essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, they were admitting to the fact that, hey, look, we know that we get misinformation from police, but we have 24-hour access. And to me, I felt like, well, I felt really sad to hear that folks had accepted that they were just going to be getting bad information from the city, bad information from our department, that they expect it, and that they have very little confidence that they will get accurate information or more objective information. But as long as they could get sort of some response, anything, something, they were happy with that. I think there's a saying that if your options are something and nothing, then something feels like everything. I think that that's a little bit of what we're experiencing here with some of the fear around moving this position. And I think that we owe it to the public, to journalists, to erase the expectation that they'll get bad information but 24-hour access, and work, as Councilmember Johnson was saying, to make sure that we do improve that access, that we do improve that quality of information, and that this is about transparency and not about PR for a single department in the city. I agree with Councilmember Goodman that this is not transformational change. I also agree that this is not about any individual in any particular position. But I think it's important that we erase the expectation that we're going to have any department in the city that just produces bad information as a given. So that's all I'll say.
Thank you, Councilmember. I put myself in queue just to make a few comments based on what we've heard. I think I have so many thoughts about this. I think on the one hand, this is a small change, and we've heard some comments that reflect that this alone is not a transformational change. But I also think that a lot of the comments that we're hearing and the concerns do reflect some deep held beliefs that policing is its own separate thing that is different from all of the other ways that we keep people safe together in our community. I think it reflects a bias in whose expertise we value as a community, as a society, and whose we don't. And I think that some of the comments are calling into question the integrity of our communications department. And if journalists have concerns about the integrity of our communications department, we need to hear about that separately, because they take great care to communicate about council actions only after we have taken action. They do not provide support to individual council offices, which was actually identified as one of the challenges that we have in communicating as a city in the communications audit and report that was done by an external organization. And so the notion that that this is, I'm concerned about some of the comments that we're getting and the way that it is calling into question a department that I have found to have a great deal of integrity in how they operate within our city system. And I think that the ways that we have organized communications within our city's enterprise perhaps just were not particularly well planned over many years, but as reflected in the communications audit. But I actually think that it does reflect some bias about what kind of information we find more valuable or more necessary to communicate, what kind of information we think needs particular expertise to communicate. And I think that, this is a small move that is part of integrating public safety into our city's whole enterprise and valuing the work that folks are doing across city departments from different lenses and different expertise to work to keep our community safe. So that's why I support this change. And I think that, that part of what we're taking on here is ensuring that our city's communications functions are working well and communicating about all of the work that the city departments are doing, from health, to transportation, to policing, to housing, etc. It's all of which are integrated into making sure that our community is safe and healthy. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to be clear. I am not questioning anyone's integrity. I think the integrity of the current operating system has been called into question around the PIO and directly called into question. I was not alluding anything around our communications department's integrity. I was expressing, I think, what I heard the communications department express, and that is concern about capacity, because moving this does not add capacity. In fact, it adds more responsibility without really addressing strengthening the communications department at all, which I think we absolutely need to do. Invest in our communications efforts around all aspects of the city. And this move, in my opinion, does not do that.
Thank you, Council Vice President. And my comments were certainly not directed at you or any of my colleagues, but rather some of the comments that we're hearing back from folks in the public. Are there any other comments or discussion on Councilmember Fletcher's motion? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
No.
Councilmember Gordon.
Yes.
Councilmember Cano.
Yes.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
No.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
No.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 9 ayes and 3 nays.
That carries, and that item has been adopted. That brings us back to the underlying resolution, which is the other items in the 2020 revised general appropriation resolution. And those items are still on the screen, although zoomed into that particular one we were just discussing, and also available in the agenda items that are on the LIM system online. So we had the motion to separate, so this item has not been moved. Councilmember Palmisano, would you like to move the rest of the items?
Madam President, we actually do have a motion on the table originally from Chair Palmisano on behalf of the Budget Committee to approve the resolution.
Oh, that's right. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Thank you, Chair Palmisano, for that motion. On Councilmember Palmisano's motion, is there any discussion on the rest of the items? And I think we will have some other motions related to specific items, bonds and other things, but this might be a time to make comments on the general changes that the council made if anyone would like to do that. Certainly could do it at the end as well. Are there any comments on these change items? Seeing none, I will just briefly comment that I think that the care that the council took in looking through the mayor's proposed budget, as well as the impacts of the 15% cuts that came in phase 1, were very in line with our shared values in focus on racial equity. And I really appreciate the partnership of Mayor Fry and his staff in that work, as well as every department head who has really stepped up to take that lens to this critical time. And I think the council's changes reflect the time that was taken to dig into those details with a really thoughtful approach to this budget. I have expressed concern about the amount of cash that we are using to balance this budget. And it is something I want to mention as we move forward into a time that I think will be a sustained shift in our budget. And so I know we're looking forward to the 2021 budget and beyond. We will start to see more details from our finance office that will help inform the mayor and the council's actions on our budget. But I do feel that this shift will likely last for years, and that the time we take now to be strategic going through each department, talking with the department directors about both financial sustainability and achieving our race equity goals, weighing which things we may need to have upfront costs, for example, to support early retirement strategies or other things that both support employees who have worked for our city for a long time, but also help us maintain our commitment to racial equity and racial diversity in our own staff are really important. And the mayor's office has indicated to me that this is a high priority for them as they shape this next 2021 budget. And I appreciate that commitment from Mayor Fry and his staff. And it's something that I really want to keep mentioning and talking about, because I think it's important for all of us to understand how these actions today and in December will impact our budget for many years to come, and in particular impact the property taxpayers of our city, who, as our budget continues to shift, will bear more of the burden of paying for city expenses than they have in the past. And with our housing market the way it is, with so many folks in our city and cities across the country facing housing instability, those property taxes translate to many into higher housing costs that they cannot bear. So I know it's on all of our minds, and I wanted to mention it today. We also took the time in this very quick and truncated process to make some shifts in our commitment to reimagine public safety. And I know that every time we see someone harmed by violence in our community, it is heartbreaking to each and every one of us, and that this council and Mayor Fry take so very seriously our commitment and our responsibility to keep people in our community safe. These are difficult decisions, and they require partnership and commitment from all of us. And this budget does make a shift away from more traditional policing investments to investing in violence prevention. It's a strategy that I and many of us have supported for a number of years. And I think that we will be able to see, for each dollar that we invest in a very small amount of funding for violence prevention, I think we will see the impacts in our community. And we know we need to see these impacts very quickly. So I just want to appreciate so much all of you and your leadership and the time that you took to talk with each other and to create thoughtful proposals in this very short time. I know that they will continue to inform our budgets going forward for 2021 and beyond. So thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Council President. I just wanted to take a moment to really lift up the work of the Public Health Department and the Office of Violence Prevention. I think it's very reassuring in a moment when we are seeing significant attrition in the Minneapolis Police Department, that whether you are someone who is cheering a reduction in the number of sworn officers in fact, or whether you are someone who that creates a lot of anxiety for, it is not something that we had planned for on this timeline, but we are seeing attrition. We are seeing a change in staffing levels, and having planning that has happened over months and years leading up to a research-based set of strategies confirmed by both pilot programs here in Minneapolis and work in other cities that allowed us to have an investment that we could make informed by careful planning was something that I think really created an opportunity for us to do something in response to the calls we've been receiving from constituents really calling on us to take action on in increasing gun violence in our city. And I think it's really important that we've been able to do this. I'm hopeful that it is helpful. I recognize this is a complex problem, and I am confident in the investment that we're making, in the leadership that we're making that investment in, and just want to really appreciate their work and really thank them in advance for the hard work ahead.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this item? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll. Oh, pardon me, Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to echo a lot of what my colleagues said, and also really hold up the partnership that I always am fortunate to have on the north side with Councilmember Cunningham. I know that as we during this budgeting process, which was so fast, there were some priorities and that were hard to sort of get met, and we sort of needed to help each other to get across the finish line. And I really want to thank Councilmember Cunningham for his partnership in that, and supporting us in as a council in getting this cure violence work off the ground. I want to remind folks that, you know, on the north side, this is where we're seeing, I think, a lot of the violence occurring. It's not lost on me. It's not lost on any of you, I'm sure. And there are a lot of nights where I dread those text messages, those calls that I get from the 4th Precinct Inspector about things that have happened in my ward or just slightly to the north. I think that we owe it to our constituents to do everything that we can to make sure that they're safe now. We're building a public safety system that I know will keep people safer well into the future, but it's also important that we start that work now. You know, Councilmember Cunningham wrote an op-ed really that talked about how the road to safety beyond policing, or reimagining public safety, starts with violence prevention. And so I'm really glad that we were able to take this opportunity, to take this what I've been referring to the coronavirus budget, to take this opportunity to do something that I think could save lives right now. You know, until we reimagine our emergency response, obviously we're going to need to have a response after the fact, after the violence has occurred. That's going to continue to happen in the form of our current policing system. But if we have an opportunity to save lives and we have an opportunity to get ahead of the violence, I think we owe it to our communities to do that as well. And I think that this budget, I think that we've made some steps in that direction, and I'm really proud of that work. So that's all I wanted to say. I wanted to thank my colleagues. Wanted to especially thank my brother to the north, King of the North, Philippe Cunningham, and also obviously all of the staff in the health department and OVP. Sasha Cotton can't be lifted up enough in doing this work, and so thank you all.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Kano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
The motion carries and that resolution is adopted. The next item is a resolution accepting $4 million from the Minneapolis-St. Paul Housing Finance Board and appropriating the transfer of those funds. Councilmember Palmisano, I'll recognize you to make this motion on behalf of the Budget Committee.
Thank you. Madam President, on behalf of the Budget Committee, I move adoption of a resolution that accepts $4 million from the Minneapolis-St. Paul Housing Finance Board in support of the revised 2020 city budget and amending the 2020 general appropriation resolution to appropriate the transfer of those funds.
Thank you. Councilmember Palmisano has moved this item. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Kano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries and that resolution is adopted. The next resolution pertains to amendments to bonded indebtedness. Councilmember Palmisano, I'll recognize you to introduce that resolution.
Thank you, Madam President. On behalf of the Budget Committee, I move adoption of a resolution that amends resolution number 2019 R-397, which has to do with the bonded indebtedness totaling $45,009,972,000 for other than public utilities and authorizing an increase in that approved level of indebtedness for projects for a revised total of $51,225,000. $51,225,000. Sorry.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. Councilmember Palmisano has moved the adoption of the resolution. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Kano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries and that is adopted. And that moves, shifts our debt a bit from a $45 million plus dollars to a little over $51 million, just to reflect those numbers. That motion carries and the resolution is adopted. The fourth and fifth resolutions are related and both pertain to the on-street parking system meter replacement project. And I'll ask Councilmember Palmisano to introduce both of those resolutions together as a package.
Madam President, on behalf of the Budget Committee, I move adoption of a resolution that amends resolution number 2019 R-398 to increase the level of bond indebtedness by $3 million for the city's on-street systems parking meter replacement project, and amends the 2020 general appropriation resolution to appropriate the transfer of those funds. And I also move adoption of a resolution that requests the Board of Estimate and Taxation to incur that increased level of indebtedness and authorize the sale of city bonds totaling $3 million for that project.
Councilmember Palmisano has moved those resolutions. Is there any discussion on the on-street systems parking meter replacement project? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Kano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries and those resolutions are both adopted. The sixth resolution pertains to employee furloughs. Councilmember Palmisano will introduce that resolution.
Thank you, Madam President. On behalf of the Budget Committee, I move adoption of a resolution that authorizes mandatory furloughs for classified, unclassified, exempt, and non-exempt employees.
Councilmember Palmisano has moved the resolution pertaining to furloughs. Is there any discussion? And we can see that on the screen in front of us. I'll just comment that this furlough strategy is really intended to minimize layoffs at a time of real economic uncertainty. And I know that we, as a community, are relying more and more on city staff to respond not only to their normal jobs, but to adjust to the pandemic impacts on our workplaces, to shift their work to remote locations, to innovate in how they're communicating with and serving the public. And that, a reduction in salary at this time is very difficult. It's difficult to ask of our employees, and I know it feels difficult. And so I just want to say thank you to all of our employees who are showing up for our city right now in the ways that you are. We're all working so hard together to serve our community through crisis, and I know that many folks who work for the city have been personally impacted by coronavirus, by caring for loved ones, by handling the trauma that our community has seen in the death of George Floyd and the social unrest that followed and the property damage, destruction, and the uncertainty of rebuilding in this time of crisis. And I just can't say enough to thank you for all that you do for our city. And I know that that is on behalf of all of us here on the City Council, our deepest appreciation and thanks for all that you do. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did also just want to mention, it feels an appropriate time, that I am giving today notice of an ordinance introduction that is specifically about these furloughs that would essentially ease the restrictions for taking a furlough day immediately before or after a paid holiday. I do anticipate through the process on a regular time schedule that would be in place before Labor Day. So I just wanted to mention that as one way we're trying to make this as tolerable as possible.
Thank you, Councilmember, and thanks for all the work that you have put in as chair to really think through how this can be have the least impact as possible on our employees and their families. Any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and that resolution is adopted. The final resolution, which we added this morning as part of the budget amendment, pertains to the hiring freeze already in place. Councilmember Palmisano will introduce that resolution.
Madam President, on behalf of our added agenda item today, I will move to adopt resolution number 2020R-122, which extends the current hiring freeze through December 31st, 2020.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Palmisano has moved the resolution that would extend the hiring freeze policy through the end of the year. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That passes and that resolution is adopted. That resolution also keeps in place the process for hiring freeze waiver requests, which go through a staff committee as outlined. They're reviewed by Mayor Fry and myself, and then they're presented to the executive committee. I do try to check in with council members on issues that I know they might be interested in or involved with ahead of those It is a decent amount of work to review those hiring freeze waivers in addition to chairing what is essentially 8 standing committees right now. So I appreciate everyone's willingness to step up and help out with all of those things that I have taken on in this pandemic time. And the final resolution, which was added this morning, pertains to that. That we just did. So next we have the series of public safety directions that were provided during the amendment process through the budget committee. And those are part of the 2020 revised budget process and also as requests to the mayor and operating departments in preparation for a proposal to the 2021 budget. These were brought forward by the budget committee and listed on the agenda. Are there any further questions or comments on those 2 staff directions before us? Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Council President. I just wanted to again reiterate my thanks to all of the department heads who, really put some thought into the initial response to this staff direction. And I think it is a remarkable and noteworthy outcome that department heads identified 15% of incidents that are currently assigned to MPD that might be a good fit for work within their departments. And that gives us an incredible starting point for thinking about the transformation work ahead and where we can tap into the talent and expertise throughout the enterprise to really think about a more comprehensive approach to public safety. So I think we got exactly the outcome we were all hoping for when we voted for this staff direction. We got a conversation that's really starting to move along. And I hope that it provides a lot of inspiration to the mayor and his staff as they're writing the 2021 budget. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I hope that we can work together to make a lot of really great things happen.
Thank you. Any further comments on this item? I will move approval of those. Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and those items are adopted. Finally, we have notice from Councilmember Palmisano about the subject matter of an ordinance she will bring forward at the next regular meeting related to personnel by amending the city code to ease restrictions for furloughs immediately before or after paid holidays, which she mentioned earlier. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel like I already spoke sufficiently to this item. We just noticed in going through this difficult process of figuring out furloughs and figuring out how we could be most equitable about them in our city, that this one piece about easing restrictions of being able to take a furlough day before or after an existing holiday was currently in our code, and we'd like to remove that so that it is that much more available for our employees and what we're asking of them right now. That's the only thing I would say about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Is there any discussion on this subject matter introduction? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Madam President, notice has been given. No actions actually required.
Thank you. So that notice is given. I took it to be a subject matter. I reread it now. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. So that will come up at the next council meeting. And with that, we have completed all of the formal actions on our agenda. Before we adjourn, I will recognize the mayor if he is here and would like to speak, but he is not, as the clerk is shaking his head. No problem. We've heard from Mayor Fry many times on this budget and, of course, at our regular city council meetings. I will note that, well, let's see, I'll do that. I'll save the big announcement of our meeting marker for the very end. I'm sure my colleagues want to make more serious comments on the budget at this time. So I will recognize my colleagues if they'd like to make any comments on the budget at this time. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam President. And my comments were not intended to be directly at the budget, though I am very proud of the work that our departments as well as my colleagues have embarked upon to bring forward this amended budget in this very difficult time. I think it absolutely speaks to the needs of our community, as well as supports the values that we have placed in front of ourselves in order to respond to communities. I really wanted to just speak to an item that we passed last week, a resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis, and really just take a moment to just thank all of the participants who helped to create that, including my own staff, Diva Sadar and Zoe Bougeray, as well as staff from the Department of Race and Equity, Ms. Joy Mar-Stevens and her team, Amelia Brown from the coordinator's office, as well as Dr. Rachel Hardiman from the University of Minnesota, and Director Musicant from the Department of Public Health, and so many others. We actually got resources and research from people from all around the country who were aware that we were embarking on this. And, you know, that's just the first step in us addressing racism and all of its ills that are physical, financial, emotional, and shows up in our public safety responses and all of these things. So I'm really just grateful for my colleagues for supporting that resolution and the subsequent work to follow. I also just wanted to acknowledge the passing of Congressman John Lewis, who without his efforts, you know, being the youngest person at the March on Washington, one of the founding members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, served in the United States Congress for over 33 years. Without his efforts, I would not be able to sit here today and give thanks to all of the people who worked on the resolution around racism. And so I just want to ask us all to take a moment of silence and reflect on his leadership, his vision, his commitment to making America a much better place to be. So I'm asking my colleagues and those who are tuning in virtually to join me in a moment of silence. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Council Vice President, and thank you for your leadership in bringing that forward. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to, now that the meeting is coming to a close, reiterate your correction of my error in saying that the Future Community Safety Work Group will be presenting at this upcoming Thursday, but actually there will be the report back on Thursday, August 6th, and the meeting starts at 1:30. That is where we will see the Future Community Safety Work Group come back and present the updates as outlined in the staff direction, so that community members are aware of the work that is laid out ahead of us. So I just wanted to reiterate that correction. My apologies. You named it quite clearly, accurately. Things are all kind of a little bit wonky with our new schedule. So thank you for that clarification. I just wanted to reiterate that. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. And thank you as well for your leadership along with Council Vice President on the resolution that she talked about, recognizing racism as a public health emergency, and your leadership as the chair of that committee in our regular council structure. Is there any other comments or announcements my colleagues would like to make about the budget or other items at this time? I don't see any. So thank you all again for all of your work. I do want to just say that our staff have let us know that today is the 100th virtual meeting that we have hosted since the pandemic began. So thank you all for hanging in there with this technology and this different way of operating. And thanks to all of our staff who are working so hard to keep our meetings open and transparent for the public, and continuing to improve on our work in this virtual environment as we, remain committed to keeping every member of our community safe, following the guidelines of the health experts who are guiding those decisions. So thank you all for those 100 meetings and all of your work that went into them. Anything further? Seeing none, and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. We are all finished, and thank you again.